So I should start by saying I'm a bit of an interloper here. I probably know the least about butterflies and moths in the room. But I think Sinead, and I'm very grateful for this, Sinead asked me to come and speak about grasslands because they're such important habitats for butterflies and moths. So hopefully something very valuable to learn a little bit more about. But I'm aware also that I'm speaking to a lot of people here that also know a lot about this already. So I decided to put fates intertwined because I really do think that semi-natural grasslands and the habitats they're often intertwined with and in mosaic with are hugely important for the species that are the focus of today and yesterday. I'm going to start with a little bit of the bad news because let's face it, we haven't had enough of that today, but I'm going to talk about grasslands being under threat. And look, it mirrors the story, and it's no surprise, really. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges, some of the reasons that they are under threat, including being hidden in plain sight. A little bit of different types of semi-natural grasslands. I'll probably speed through a couple of the things or skip a few things just in the interest of moving on, but it's useful that we speak the same language to the greatest degree because it helps with messaging, it helps with communicating to others. We're a room full of interested people, both amateur and professional, but often we have the opportunity to speak to others for whom this is very, very new. So it's useful to have similar language and to not further muddle things. I'll talk a little bit about ways that you can potentially visit good sites. You might be interested to see the grasslands, or you might be interested to see if they have good butterflies or moths at said sites, and a little bit of where to find out more. Because one of the things I'd like to do is to give you guys more information and some tools to learn a bit more. So hopefully that's the plan. So like I said, starting a little bit with the not so good news, semi-natural grasslands are under massive threat. I'll talk about some of the confounding factors and some of the challenges. We don't have nationwide good mapping of where all our good grasslands are, but what we do have is some quite good sample surveys, and they tell us a lot about some of the elements, some of the things that are driving change, and give us a way to quantify some of the change. So one of the things we're quite lucky, a relatively it's not comprehensive, it's still just a sample, but a relatively well-organised, widespread survey took place between 2007 and 2012, the Irish Semi-Natural Grassland Survey, and about 1,200 sites were visited all across Ireland. And that gives us a really good baseline of what grasslands were looking like then, where certain types of grasslands were found, how they were managed, and what the threats were. Since then, on a roughly 6-year cycle to tie in with reporting obligations to Europe under the Habitats Directive, a subset of those sites have been revisited, maybe about 10%, typically the best of the best. These are the grasslands that have these annex listed plant communities, so very special plant communities. So this is, like I said, a subset. It's not comprehensive mapping or comprehensive data, but it is a very good snapshot. And the findings from these are quite stark. And again, we're thinking best of the best. So between these two surveys, there's an average of 5 to 10 years, roughly, between when people visited the sites. And in the species-rich calcareous grassland, so think of the burren, between the first set of surveys in 2007-2012 and the next set of surveys, 2015 to 2017, 31% of the area of the visited calcareous grasslands were gone. 28% of the lowland hay meadows, also an annex listed habitat, were gone. Now, lowland hay meadow would have been kind of the background grassland type before the 70s, before the mechanization of agriculture. So it would have been the default grassland type really across a huge part of Ireland. For millennium meadows, about 7% of the habitat was gone. So again, this is really stark and in a relatively short period of time. We've since done another round of surveying. So the surveys took place 2021 to 2023. The data is in, but not fully finalized. It's not yet publicly available, but just to give you an idea that we're looking at kind of similar figures. I'm like Liam now, the smaller the font gets, the more I'm going to have to lean over at the screen. But again, about half of the sites that had calcareous grassland, the species-rich calcareous grassland, showed a loss of area. So half of the sites they revisited, the 110 or so sites had a loss of area. Sorry, not all the 110 were calcareous grassland, but of those, the numbers are there actually. 3 sites were gone completely, they had been lost. That habitat is no longer present, and 65 hectares of that habitat area had been lost. 65 hectares is a lot of species-rich calcareous grassland to be gone. For Millennium Meadow, again, from the newer data, about 40% of the sites had lost some area, 2 sites completely lost, and about 15% of the habitat had been lost overall since the last visits. And again, I won't labour this because it's just hammering home the same point. when we report on the conservation status as NPWS, when we report to Europe, we use a traffic light system. You won't be surprised. Don't worry about the detail. The traffic lights are all red for these habitats. We're not an outlier in Ireland. It doesn't make this okay. It doesn't excuse anything, but semi-natural grasslands are tricky to map, manage, and see positive results. Other countries are fighting a similar battle. Like I said, that's not a reason to be complacent, but we're not particular outliers. We're very different in that we have mainly privately owned small farms, which are both present opportunities and challenges in terms of how we navigate this journey. So the main threats. I'm going to mention two main threats on this slide, and then I'm going to talk about a few other fairly significant issues that play out as well. There are two main threats, and one is straight out habitat loss. That's fairly straightforward. Habitat loss can be to intensive agriculture. So if you go in and fertilize a field, sometimes that is enough to utterly change the plant community for decades. Fertilizers and the nutrient status utterly drive what your plant community is made up of. If you add fertilizers, a small number of plants that are good at taking up fertilizer quickly squeeze out everything else. And if that's one of the only messages, if that's a new concept or something you can pass on, that's a very important message. But clearly, if you go in and plow and reseed and then fertilize, that also utterly changes the habitat. But sometimes just fertilizer alone is enough. Also, forestry and other land uses that change the habitat type are clearly big threats. Forestry is going to become one of the biggest threats, if not the biggest threat, for semi-natural grassland in Ireland because of kind of conflicting policy agendas. We need more trees, we need more forestry. Do we have the right people making the right decisions with the right skills and the right knowledge to assess every patch so that we're not losing some of our best, for example, in particular wet grasslands, marsh fertility sites will be particularly vulnerable if they're not already known. So we have some really big drivers that are coming down the road in terms of driving habitat loss. But on the other side of the coin, abandonment is also a massive threat to semi-natural grasslands. It's less drastic, it's less immediate, but it applies over huge areas, absolutely huge parts of the west of Ireland. And so when you have abandonment, a little bit of abandonment and scrub encroachment, no problem, but you quickly, if things start to close in, you start to lose the plant species and the invertebrate species that require open habitats. And it isn't to say that rewilding doesn't have a place, it sure does, but again, are we making informed decisions about maintaining, certain percentages of open habitats and choosing our best ones and the ones that support the widest range of species? And I would argue that we're not there yet in terms of fully informed decision making about that. So look, the key message in terms of this is that semi-natural grasslands absolutely need management. It just needs to be appropriate. Some of the other confounding factors, those are the two biggest threats that we've identified, but there are other confounding factors. These aren't coming up in order, that's my fault. But many of our grasslands are outside designated areas. So the semi-natural grassland survey that I mentioned, the one that visited 1,200 sites, about 80% of those were not in designated areas. What I don't have figures to hand is, are most of our best ones in designated areas? A higher proportion will be, but there are still an awful lot of our good grasslands are not designated for a variety of reasons. So that is definitely a challenge. I'll also fully acknowledge being in a designated area is not a gold ticket to perfect management or future state. One of the other things I'll come back to is that grasslands are often hidden in plain sight. That is not inconsiderable in terms of public knowledge, our ability to map them, our ability to communicate their importance to people, where they are and what they support. Look, that touches on the fact that our mapping is inadequate, and I mentioned that already. We do not have comprehensive mapping of our semi-natural grasslands. I'll just mention we do have a national land cover map now. It is really good at picking grasslands from other broad types. It is really, really poor at telling semi-natural grasslands apart, and even quite poor at telling semi-natural grassland from kind of semi-improved, improved. So that isn't going to answer our questions if anyone's thinking, oh, but we have the national land cover map. It was never designed to be a habitat map, and it's particularly going to struggle with grasslands. Even if we have good mapping, we need to know about management for grasslands. The future of grasslands is dependent on appropriate management. So even if we have mapping, we often don't know, is the management appropriate now, or is it likely to continue so? So that's a confounding factor. And I've mentioned kind of well-meaning conservation efforts. People that plant trees and people that use wildflower seeds invariably mean very well. And we have to be very, very careful in terms of how we interact with people making decisions that are well-intentioned, but perhaps not in the best interest of nature. So it's something to definitely bear in mind and to be very careful about how we how we interact with in terms of getting the best result. I'm just going to say a little bit more about the use of wildflower seeds, because I really do think it's something it's quite a big issue that's out there. I've had people say to me, oh, I bought these seeds in the garden centre and I put them, this is in Ennis, there's not many flowers down in the floodplain, so I brought them down to the floodplain. I've also had somebody say that they brought wildflower seeds out to Bull Island because there weren't many flowers. These people mean well, but now these were members of the public that really didn't have a clue, but there's all sorts of levels of misunderstanding, but it's well-intentioned. So we really collectively need to work to guide people to put their money and their effort into something that's likely to be more useful. And I think a lot is about recalibrating meadow. It's funny, wildflower seed, wildflower meadow, those terms are almost lost. If you Google them now, what you see is what's on the top left photo. You see a packet rather than an actual meadow. So a meadow is meant to be a grassy area, and a wildflower meadow will have a mix of grasses and flowers. It'll often look messy, and that type of horticultural planting that's in the top left should really be limited to gardens and urban areas. And all of us in the room, because we're here with various different hats on, we all have a part to play in kind of recalibrating and helping people, whether it's our neighbours or farmers or whatever, to learn to love our wildflowers, which are, you know, widely known as weeds. So just to say a little bit again about hidden in plain sight. So to most normal people, I'm going to say that, look, most of us in this room are a little non-standard in Ireland in that we already value nature. We already spend a lot of time looking and thinking about nature. Most people see no difference between the two grassland photos there in the images. They don't think about it. It's not something that concerns them. So they can be hidden in plain sight. Talking about, oh, grasslands are rare or grasslands are important. Most members of the general public think, what are you on about? There's grasslands everywhere. So there is definitely, whereas you don't have to explain why you might say that an oak woodland is important or a bog has certain values and uses. People can already visualize what you mean. So semi-natural grasslands, not necessarily so. So I often show this and I ask people, but in the interest of speed, I'll speed on. One of the nicest examples of a species-rich lowland hay meadow that I've ever been in. This is the Moy floodplain near Foxford. And I often ask people to maybe see, well, where might it be in the photograph? And if I was looking at that photograph, I'd be looking at the old river channels and the meanders and where I can see different colours, but actually, and there are lots of nice grasslands around there, but actually inside in there, that uniform looking piece of green with the big spoil heap, that is a phenomenal species-rich lowland hay meadow, managed by an older farmer who's organic just by accident. It's not he just didn't change as agriculture mechanized. And to give you an idea, that's what the field looks like when it's in flower and just after it's been cut. Again, trying to map grasslands if they've been mown, trying to tell that from an aerial photograph. They're really hidden on so many levels, and there's an awful lot happening with remote sensing. Remarkably difficult to tell grasslands. You have to use multiple images at multiple times of the year, probably over multiple years, in order to get some sort of reliable signal. Certainly for grasslands like this that are going to look quite uniform because they're mown, but they're anything but on the ground. And I think I will I'm just going to not labor this too much. I think it's quite useful to give people an idea of what you're looking for when people might say, well, God, how do I tell a semi-natural grassland? What am I looking for? And in short, you're looking for lots of species, and very typically you're looking for a really good mix of the flowering species, so the herbs we call them, in relation to the grasses. If you're seeing lots of perennial ryegrass, or a very, very grass-dominated sward, it tells you something about the agricultural management of the site. But if you see a lot of a mix, if you could see underneath the ground, you would be able to see an excellent fungal network and healthy soils. But if you're there in October, November in particular, you might see wax caps. So wax caps, these little colourful fungi, are often a really good indicator of good quality or long-standing semi-natural grasslands, or grasslands that haven't been fertilised or subjected to very heavy management. Also, just to mention the presence of moss. People will maybe be familiar with managing their lawns, or other people near and dear to them managing their lawns, the perennial fight against moss. One of the best things you can do is add fertilizer and your grass will outcompete your moss. So again, if you're seeing lots of moss out in a grassland, it tells you something about the fertilization and the management regime. Anthills are a fantastic indicator for long-standing, good quality grassland. They tend to be lumpy and bumpy and messy, is one of the key things. If you're seeing orchids and sedges, again, they tend to tell you something about the management of the site. Sedges and orchids, generally, most of the species tend to get lost if there's intensive management and if there's a lot of nutrients going onto the site. And again, just to give an idea, a couple of images here that I think present a little bit of the variation. The top right is again that lovely meadow from the Moy. Below it is, it's not very species rich, but it is a semi-natural wet grassland. It has a value. It's not going to be mapped as an annex grassland, but it certainly has a great value. The middle one is a park grassland, again, relatively species rich. And then the rocky one doesn't look all that exciting right there. There's not a lot in flower. It's grazed. I was doing a quadrat. That's a 2 by 2 metre quadrat. It's actually a patch of grassland in the Burren. And in a 20 by 20 metre plot there, 10% of the vascular plant flora of Ireland occurs in a 20 by 20 metre plot in that field. So again, it's so hard to tell the diversity and the value of a grassland until you're in it and with some knowledge. I would say you do not need to be able to name all of those, but you would need to be able to get down on your hands and knees and say there's a lot here, there's a lot that's different, and the mix of broadleaved herbs and grasses is suggesting that this is very interesting. So they're often kind of, like, again, hidden in plain sight. Just to think about, not going to go into too much detail here, but thinking about how we classify grasslands, how we think about them. Most of you will be familiar of the Fawcett guideline book, The Guide to Habitats in Ireland. The grasslands are broken up into 2 big categories. So improved grassland, don't like that term. So these are the agriculturally altered grasslands. They're not improved in my book, but they're improved from an agricultural point of view, or for amenity potentially as well. So that's one set of grasslands, and these tend to be of quite low value for nature. Other things have been valued, like productivity or amenity. More and more, we're looking at those now because people are looking to restore or to enhance areas like that, particularly amenity. There's a lot of parks and local authorities looking to change the story. So more and more, we're looking at these as starting points, and can we try to improve the story? Grant. Semi-natural grasslands then are the other main group. And again, not going to go into too much detail. The Fawcett classification breaks up into 4 different grassland types, kind of split: wet, dry, acid calcareous, and how they're managed, whether they're grazed or mown. I just want to say as well, and I'm not going to go into any detail at all on this, we now have a more detailed vegetation classification called the Irish Vegetation Classification. There's a link there. It sits on the National Biodiversity Data Centre website. 20 grassland types in 4 broader categories. So we can now map and talk about our grasslands in a much more detailed way, which will be extremely useful. But it's not yet, most people are just learning the IVC, so the Fawcett categories are still very, very useful. But we will hopefully be moving over the next coming years to something that's a lot more detailed in the Irish Vegetation Classification. And again, I'm just going to flick these up. Don't worry about the small text. We have 4 main types of, I'll keep my life simple, 4 main types of grasslands that are listed on the Habitats Directive. We often call them annex grasslands. So again, in the aims of trying to demystify a bit, what we mean by annex grasslands are these special types that are conform to a plant community, and they're rare across Europe, and they've been listed in the Habitats Directive. Orchid-rich calcareous grassland, species-rich nardus grassland, which is an upland acid type, Millennium meadow, which is a wet grassland, often very much associated with marsh fertility, and the lowland hay meadow, which I mentioned. So I just want to lean over. Just want to take the opportunity. Unfortunately, I do not have copies for everybody in the audience, but this is a new booklet that you can download it from. And I did put it up there actually, greatirishgrasslands.ie. If you want to go and visit some nice grasslands, there's a really nice suite of grasslands in this booklet. They're all across Ireland and Northern Ireland. Some are parts of big houses, they're big mown meadows. Others are privately owned farmland. Some of those farmers one of the farmers is in the room actually, at least one. Some of the farmers are happy to take people on tours of their land. Others are private and they're just included in order to properly represent the range of types of situations that we get good grasslands on. We started out with quite a few of the big houses and open parks, and we realized if we give the impression that that's the only place you get good grasslands, that's completely the wrong idea. Most of our good grasslands are farmed and they're out in farmland. So it's a nice resource in terms of being able to see places or to point other people to if they want to go and visit something and experience a grassland. And maybe be wowed in high summer, but also maybe be slightly underwhelmed in winter, but understand that that's what great grasslands can look like. They can be underwhelming a lot of the time, but no less important. Doneraile Estate is one example. Castletown House is another example. These are of the big house variety. But I just want to labour the point, and at least one person in the room may recognise this animal. it is not all about big meadows and big houses. Every patch of grassland, big or small, and every management type has a part to play in the story. So I must be very near my last couple of minutes. I've mentioned already in terms of some of the key things to bear in mind when you're thinking of managing for semi-natural grassland. So I'll make this fairly quick, but nutrients are one of the key things. So you've got the nutrient status of your soil. Some soils are more naturally nutrient poor and some are naturally shallower. And then obviously we have the factor of added nutrients for farming or for amenity, whatever the case. So nutrients are one of the big things to think about and to advise on and to assess in terms of a starting point if you're looking at managing a site or trying to restore a site. Grazing, cattle are excellent grazers, but because they bring great diversity. Traditional breeds tend to be really, really good. They often excite and involve a farmer in a way that just thinking about a change in a semi-natural grassland or a quadrat having a different result might not excite them. So they tend to be really good in that way, but also they're so much hardier. They'll survive on much more rough fodder. They tend to need an awful lot less minding, particularly on rough ground or if they're out in winter. Mowing, cut and remove is hugely important, and that's whether you're obviously looking at a meadow, but amenity management or park management. If you don't cut and remove, if you leave the cuttings sit, it's like applying fertilizer in a way. It's like applying compost. So just to think about that. And I will flick on through those. I think one of the most important things is that to bear in mind that management also needs to be flexible and adaptable. Being over-prescriptive is not that useful because nature changes, weather changes. So sometimes if a sward is getting heavy for whatever reason, there's been great growth and I'm thinking, often in floodplains, you'll get maybe extra flooding, extra deposition. You need to be ready to react to that. And those of us, I work in National Parks and Wildlife Service. If we're running farm plan schemes, we need to work in that flexibility and adaptability. And there may be lots of other scenarios where people in this room might have a say over how things are managed, and working that in is very important as well. And I won't say anything about this because I'm out of time, other than to say if anybody doesn't know about the use of green hay as a potentially nice method when you're looking at restoring grasslands, this would typically be used where you have a site that is species poor and maybe other things have been tried and it's not working out so well. It's a very useful way. That's a before and after photo on that slide, and I have another before and after photo from the same site there. Intensive agriculture, green hay taken from Doneraile House nearby, spread on the site. Phenomenal results in terms of species, increased species richness in the recipient site. And those species are locally relevant. These sites are 7 kilometres apart with very similar soil. So there's a little leaflet that we've made. It's early days in Ireland in terms of trialling this, and we hope to update this over the next couple of years as more and more farms and sites try the green hay method. There's a little downloadable leaflet on the same website, greatirishgrasslands.ie, if you're interested in that, or if it's something you'd like to share with others. And I think that is me, other than, and are the talks going to be shared afterwards? Yeah, I've given some links here to some of the key sites. If people want to learn more about grasslands, there's lots of material on site. If you want a deep dive, there's training videos, an hour long, identifying grasses, the nitty gritty. Other stuff is a lot easier going. There's a little animation that can be shared from the Great Irish Grasslands website. Lots of different stuff that you can go and explore there and find out more. Okay, thank you very much.